Hello everyone. Today we are going to continue our discussion of texture mapping. So we have already seen how to perform texture mapping on various 3D surfaces. Today we will discuss various uses of texture mapping, some amount of detail. So we have already seen that to texture map complex geometries, it is common to embed those complex geometries inside bounding objects. So here we see an example of bounding a teapot inside a sphere, and then we have seen that you can use other bounding geometries like cylinder. This allows the texture to represent some sort of an environment around the object, and this is known as environment mapping. Depending upon the bounding object that you use, it is also called sphere mapping or cylinder mapping. Similarly, you can use a cube to represent the environment. We have also mentioned this earlier that you can use a cube as an environment map, and it is called a skybox at times when it is used to give a view of the surrounding skyline and the sky around a certain scene, right? And the textures are mapped onto the side of a bounding cube. The same idea of using a cube map can be used to fake reflections. Imagine you are trying to render a shiny silver teapot and you want to create reflections on the surface of this teapot. Then what you can do is that you can keep your camera at the location where you will keep your teapot. Make it point in each of the 6 directions. So front, back, left, right, top and bottom, and capture an image with the camera. This is in your virtual scene. Whatever the camera sees, take that image and put it on the appropriate face of a cube. Use that as a cube map and render the teapot inside this cube map. Okay? You will see the cube texture on the surface, or the texture from the bounding cube appear on the surface of the teapot, which will make it look like a shiny reflective teapot. So this is of course not the accurate reflection that you are producing. This is a fake reflection. However, for complex geometries, it looks reasonably real. The only thing that this cannot simulate is moving objects. So it is very good for static environments, but if anything in the environment changes, then the environment map has to be regenerated with the new location of the moved objects or entity. Textures can also be used to create shadows in the scene, and this process is known as shadow mapping. Here a texture is used to store the shadow variable. So remember that in our form illumination model, we said that we can extend it to handle shadows by having this binary variable for point light sources, where for every point light source and a surface point, this variable says whether that surface point is in shadow with respect to a particular light source or not. So there is a way to generate the value of this variable and store it in a texture and apply it during rendering. This is a 2-pass rendering method. So let us look at some details of how this can be done. So consider that you have a light source. So this is the light source, and you have some 3D scene, and you are trying to render it from a camera and create an image. The question that you are trying to answer for every pixel on this image is whether a pixel P on this image is in shadow or not. If this pixel P is the image point corresponding to a real world point, capital P, then a shadow will appear at small p in the image if the real world point, capital P, is in shadow with respect to the light source. So how is this done? This is done as a two-pass rendering algorithm. In the first pass, we render the scene from the point of view of the light source. So we keep the camera at the location of the light source and we look towards the scene and we render the scene from the point of view of the light source, and we do not draw this rendering to the screen. However, we do update the depth buffer or Z buffer. This depth buffer is stored into a texture image. This image is called the shadow map. This is the first pass of the shadow mapping algorithm. In the second pass of the shadow mapping algorithm, we actually render the scene that we want to the screen, and for every pixel that you are trying to color, you map that pixel to light space again. What do we mean by that? You take the 3D point corresponding to a pixel small p, that is capital P, and look at this point by placing your camera at the light source. When you do that, you will be able to measure the distance of this point, capital P, from the camera placed at the light source. Let this be given by DLP. For the same point, in the first render pass, you would have recorded a depth in your depth map. Let this depth be DSP, because this is the depth corresponding to P, the shadow map. Now if DLP is greater than DSP, then we can conclude that there is some other object that is closer than the point P to the light source, because that is the object that has appeared in your shadow map instead of the point P. That is why the distance DLP is greater than DSP. If this is the case, therefore, we can conclude that the point capital P is in shadow. So this is the two-pass rendering algorithm for creating shadows using textures. So let us have a look at this again using a real rendered example. So suppose this is the scene that you want to render. So in the first rendering pass, we render the scene from the point of view of the light source. So you can see here that this is the view of the scene from the light source, and this is the Z buffer. So you store this to a texture. Then in the second pass of the rendering algorithm, we render the scene from the original eye point or the original camera, and we convert every pixel to light space, and we ask whether the point on the scene is further away or closer than the point recorded on the shadow map. If the point is closer, then you say that the point is not in shadow, and if the point is further away, then you say that the point is in shadow. This allows you to create a shadow variable which is 0, 1 depending upon whether a point is in shadow or not. So here you can see that the regions that are in shadow are actually colored white, and the regions that are not in shadow are colored black, this image. When we apply this to your final render, the points that are masked by this image appear in shadow in your final rendered image, and the other points are out of this shadow. This is a very fast algorithm, even though it uses 2 rendering passes. And you can also scale it for multiple light sources. You simply have to repeat this process for every light source separately. This is fast because it is implemented on hardware. However, there is a slight problem here. The problem arises because we have a texture that only has a finite number of pixels, and on this you are trying to store information about points on your scene. So remember that there can be many points in your scene, and there are only a fixed number of pixels available in your texture or shadow map. So there are sampling errors when you go from the scene to the texture, and this can cause aliasing in your shadows. So what will the aliasing appear as? The aliasing will appear as jagged boundaries for the shadows. The boundaries of the shadows will not be smooth. So I want you to go through this shadow mapping example and the previous shadow mapping sort of illustration that we have shown in these slides, and try to convince yourselves that if you do not have enough resolution in the shadow map, then you will observe aliasing or jagged boundaries for the shadows. The shadow boundaries will not be smooth and neat. Texture aliasing, however, is a generic problem, and texture aliasing occurs because of the following reason. It can happen that a large part of the texture maps to a small part of the rendered image on your screen. You can see here that this texel has mapped onto this pixel. However, the consecutive pixel on the rendered image is getting its information from a texel that is not next to the texel that the previous pixel got its information from. So the information from this green texel is completely missing from the scene. This results in textures which look broken when you have applied them to the scene. So here is a texture that is a yellow image with red lines on it, and when I texture map it onto a scene containing this teapot, if this teapot is of a smaller size than this texture, you can see that these red lines appear broken up. So you can see these gaps, the red line, right? This is because consecutive texels do not map to consecutive pixels all the time. This is the problem of texture aliasing. What is the solution? So consider that you have a pixel on your scene. What if I could consider the corners of this pixel and compute the quadrilateral to which this corresponds in texture space? Because this pixel, even if it is a square pixel, it will not map to a square on the texture image. So far what have we been saying? That corresponding to this pixel, find out one texel there, and that is causing this aliasing. So instead of finding that one texel, what if I could find out this area on the image corresponding to a finitely sized pixel, and then average all the color information in this area and apply that information, that averaged information, to this pixel in my scene. This is called pre-filtering. The effect that this has is that it smoothens out or averages out the texture before it gets applied, and therefore it prevents texture aliasing. However, you would have noticed that here we are talking about mapping the area corresponding to a pixel onto a texture. So in some sense we are talking about sub-pixel sized quantities. We do not have access to sub-pixel sized quantities in the rasterizing pipeline. A pixel is the smallest unit that we can access. in a fragment shader, for example. Therefore, an alternative to pre-filtering that is followed in the rasterization pipeline is that instead of getting only one sample per pixel from the texture image, we do super sampling. So imagine that instead of sampling only once corresponding to a pixel, we sample once and then we take, say, the 4 neighboring pixels of that one sample. We average those 4 neighboring pixels, get an average color and apply it to the pixel in the scene. So in some sense, instead of one sample, one texture sample corresponding to a pixel, we have multiple texture samples corresponding to a pixel. This process is called super sampling. So super sampling is a common way of performing anti-aliasing. So here on the left top you can see the aliased image, and then you can see the anti-aliased image that is produced by pre-filtering and by super sampling. So pre-filtering is sort of the more optimal solution. It produces a better looking anti-aliased image, but because it involves sub-pixel level quantities and we cannot do pre-filtering once the fragments have been generated, therefore our option in a rasterizing pipeline is to perform super sampling, averaging by doing super sampling, and that produces the kind of image that you see on the bottom right hand side. Okay. You can increase the amount of super sampling. So instead of 4 samples, you can take 8 samples, 16 samples, 32 samples, and so on. And with increasing number of samples, you get better and better anti-aliased images till, of course, you hit some sort of a plateau and you cannot go beyond a certain limitation that the resolution of the image and the resolution of the rendered scene imposes on you. In order to do super sampling, you have to average out these samples on the texture image again and again. This is a compute intensive operation because every time for rendering each scene pixel, you are redoing this average. There is one way of making this go a bit faster, and that is by using what are known as MIP maps. MIP maps pre-calculate the average colors at some levels of a image pyramid. So imagine that you have a texture and the largest level of the texture is available to you. So imagine that the largest level of the texture is 1024 cross 1024. For example, what I can do is that I can create an image that is half of this image in every dimension, right? So I half the width and I half the height, such that 4 pixels of the original image are averaged to give 1 pixel in a lower resolution image. Okay, so from 1024 cross 1024, I get an image that is 512 cross 512. I have averaged 4 pixels here to get 1 pixel here. Okay, you repeat this process and you get smaller and smaller versions of the original texture till you are left with the lowest level of this pyramid hierarchy. If the original texture was a power of 2, then the lowest level will just be a single pixel image. This pyramid of images can be automatically computed given the original texture image, and OpenGL will actually do it for you. It will automatically compute the MIP map. You just have to enable it. How are MIP maps used? At runtime, what happens is that when you are trying to, say, texture map a scene for a given fragment, you compute that this fragment covers an area corresponding to 9 texture samples. So here you have 9 texture samples approximately that correspond to one fragment of your scene. So now the pre-filtering solution would have been to average these 9 samples to get the color here, okay, or to take 9 samples. The super sampling solution would have been to take 9 samples of the texture image, the highest resolution texture image, and average them out and assign them to this fragment, right? The MIP mapping solution is to identify that you have a 9:1 mapping here. 9:1 lies between the 4:1 and 16:1 levels of the MIP map. So therefore you take the corresponding texture sample from the 4:1 MIP map level and the 16:1 MIP map level. Then you linearly interpolate between these two to get to the 9:1 MIP map level. So the 9:1 MIP map level, let us say, is somewhere here, right? So you compute the color on the 4:1 texture, compute the color on the 16:1 texture, linearly interpolate them to get a color corresponding to 9:1, and then use that color for texture mapping. Assign that color to your fragment. So what did this do? This saved you some cost of calculating the average of the texture samples by leveraging the fact that you have pre-calculated some of these averages and stored them in the MIP map. Okay, so MIP maps make texture anti-aliasing slightly faster, and if you are doing any sort of texture mapping, you should enable MIP maps because they just make texture mapping look much better, right? And OpenGL will create the MIP map for you automatically. You do not have to create this image pyramid by yourself. You just have to load the appropriate texture to your OpenGL application program.